All right, everybody, welcome back to the main stage here at the Boston Marathon Expo, our virtual expo. This year, most years, we are joined in person by some running legends, and this hour we're joined by one of them virtually. She joins us from La Jolla, California. Everyone say good day to Bobbi Gibb. Bobbi, how are you doing?
Fine. Hi. How are you, TK? This is so great that you're doing this. And hi to everyone out there. I wish I were there. I was coming, but this COVID thing has knocked a loop in everybody's lives, I think.
Bobbi, before we jump into your background and long and storied history in running, how are you in California? How are you doing?
Good, great. I run every day. I still manage to get in a run, and I go to run through the woods and on the beach and around the neighborhood and in the house. Sometimes I just do laps inside the house or around the yard. But an hour a day keeps the doctor away.
Wow. Are you really doing 60 minutes every day? Good for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's not as fast as I used to run, but it's keeping in shape. Yeah.
Bobbi, you are a incredibly talented scientist, sculptor, artist. The list goes on, but you've got some artwork there behind you. What are we looking at here?
I've gone totally crazy out here. Usually I do these very detailed, realistic sculptures, portraits and sculptures of the human body and so forth, which I love. I love. And but I don't have the clay out here, or the armatures, and but I do have paint and I have canvas. And I love biology. I study biology. I study neuroscience. I work in the field of neurodegenerative research. And I love cosmology. I've always been totally fascinated by the fact of existence in the cosmos and the universe. And here's this little Earth and this planetary system. And I've always felt very close to that. Amazing, because I love science. I mean, to me, science is a spiritual experience, and I studied science for years, atoms and molecules. And to me, it's miraculous, absolutely miraculous. I mean, why is there an atom? I mean, imagine what it took just to create one atom. I mean, this is unbelievable. And we have no idea how or why it got here. I mean, we have all kinds of ideas and theories, but I mean, this is the kernel of religion and science, is this sense of wonder and awe that we have of the bare fact of existence, our own too. I mean, we're part of it. We're made of atoms that were forged in the cores of stars. I mean, this is amazing. We're woven into this thing. We're part of the biological system and part of the cosmos. So, of course, when I paint, I'm thinking of biology and I'm thinking of the cosmos. And so that's what I'm painting here. And I'm having a lot of fun.
Well, it looks really, really cool. And you have no shortage of science background. You started at Tufts University. That's where you went to your undergrad school. I think you studied physics, math, biology, right? I mean, you
Right.
picking it up early.
Right. And then I transferred out to the University of California here in La Jolla. So I'm very near where I went to school here years ago. And I've kept up my interest in science. And then I was fascinated by neuroscience, and I fell in love with neuroscience. My whole life is a series of falling in loves with different things. And I fell in love with neuroscience. And I worked at MIT for many years with Jerry Leffin, who was a great neuroscientist he wrote a paper, he and his colleagues wrote a paper called What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain. And it really changed the way people thought about our nervous system and how we see things. We think what we see is out there. The blue is in the sky, the green is in the grass, and so forth. But actually, all that comes into our eyes are little wavelets of light. So how do we go from wavelets of light to this huge sort of pageantry of beauty and color that we see around us? It's really amazing. I mean, how could this thing evolve? How could it be created? Or, how could this exist? So this is what I've been studying for years and years and years.
you have always pushed the boundaries into new endeavors of science. I mean, didn't some people roll their eyes when you were moving into different fields of science?
Well, when I grew up in the 50s and 60s, it was thought that women were not mentally capable of doing math and science. I mean, that was the general idea that women, we were taught to have this image of ourselves actually as emotional creatures without much ability to reason. And it was the men who could reason, who were rational and so forth. And when the women were just kind of emotional, not to be taken too seriously. So I had to struggle against that. But as a child, I was extremely curious about everything, and I still am. I mean, as I say, this sense of wonder and this sense of, and it's not just about a material existence. It's about, and I don't see spirit and the physical as being disjoint. I see them an integrated whole. And so I always felt this sense of sort of love, being surrounded by this sense of love, whatever you want to call it, in this sort of creative force of the universe. And this was out in nature, particularly in nature. And so I don't see science as sort of mindless material, atoms bouncing against each other. I mean, I see it as miraculous. And so I've always been incredibly curious about how it works. And science is how we discover how it works. Science doesn't say why, but science can tell us more and more and more about how it works or how we interact with it. And so I had that natural curiosity. My father has the same curiosity and the same love of nature. And so he encouraged this in me, but a lot of society discouraged women in science. And when I got to be older, then in my early 20s, then my parents and society put a lot of pressure on me not to study science. Like, you should get a job, you know, as a secretary where you can meet some rich man that you can marry so you can get married and have children and so forth. And there was this huge pressure, and I wanted to be married. I love men, and I wanted to have children, but I also wanted to explore my mental and physical capabilities. And I could see that women were generally discouraged from lines of intellectual inquiry and also from physical activities once they became mature.
It seems that one of the big strengths you fell into, one way or another, was running. You when did you start running, and when did you really start realizing you were running for long distances?
Well, I love running as a toddler. My mother could never, she was always trying to get me to behave like a young lady, you know, and dressing me in skirts and patent leather shoes and this sort of thing. And oh, I would have none of it. I mean, even as a toddler, my dad would take me to a park. I grew up my first years through the age of 3, I was in Watertown. And I can remember a lot about those early years. And we had a park in Waverly near where we lived. And my dad would take me to this park as a little toddler. And I would see the green grass and the woods, and I would just tear across the field as fast as my little legs could go. And I just loved this feeling of the scenery going by and being part of it. I had this sense of being part of this creative, whatever it is, this love, this energy of the universe flowing through me when I was running. And it was a way of celebrating being alive. Like, I'm alive, yay! And so it started early. I started out as a sprinter. I love to sprint. You know, even now I go to the beach and I will tear down the beach at top speed. I love it. When I was at Tufts, I met a guy who ran cross country, and at the time I was running through the woods with my neighborhood dogs and just running and running, and I'd run and run, and I'd flop down and I'd look up at the trees, and I'd sit there for hours and just look at nature. And so when he said, he ran 5 miles cross country. I was amazed. 5 miles, he ran 5 miles without stopping. And so I started to run with him. And at first I couldn't keep up. And he'd circle around and, and then as I ran more and more, I began to be able to keep up. And so he and I ran all over Boston together. And we'd run up and down the alleys, and we'd run out into the suburbs, and we'd run out to the fells. We'd actually run. I could run all the way to Winchester, which was the next town over from Tufts, and we'd run up into the fells, and I'd show him some of my paths and some of the beauties of nature up there. So he's the one that got me into longer distance running.
So this was in the mid 1960s, and at some point in 1965, I'm imagining you then set your sights on the 1966 Boston Marathon. When did you fall in love with this idea of running the Boston Marathon?
Well, it was 1964. The father of one of my best childhood friends said, "You who love running so much, ought to go see the Boston Marathon." What's that? 26.2 miles. That human beings actually run 26.2 miles without stopping. I was just blown away. So my dad and I went out in April of 64, and we stood at Wellesley, and I saw this pack of men run by, and I totally fell in love with it. And I wasn't thinking man or woman. I was just thinking, wow, these are kindred souls. And to me, the courage it takes to do something like that, and the endurance and so forth, was kind of symbolic of life. You start at the beginning, you're all fresh and young, and then you run this distance, and you do your best, and you get to the end. And I guess there was just a few hundred runners in those days. There were no big city marathons. Running wasn't a big thing. Men didn't even run. And for a grown woman to run in public was thought improper. So when I fell in love with it, it was just an inner thing. I had no sense of competition. I had never heard of the BAA. I had no idea what the amateur athletic union was. I was totally outside the world of sports. But I had fallen in love with this thing, and I'm still in love with it. I'm still in love with the Boston Marathon and with marathoning, and of course with people.
Yeah.
And so I just set out training. I had no coach, no books, no idea. I thought, well, I just run longer and longer distances and see if I could do it.
In 1964, there were about 300 people who ran the race. I think it was the first time the race ever expanded over 300 people. At that time, did your father know or think? I mean, did your parents have any idea that in the back of your mind you were thinking about maybe doing it yourself someday?
No, I know. I knew they already thought I was nuts. No, why don't you settle down and get married? Why don't you live like a normal woman, young woman is supposed to? Why are you up in the woods for hours and hours running with the dogs? They already thought I was nuts. I mean, not really. They knew I was, healthy and stuff, but they would, if I had told them that I was going to that I was going to train for the Boston Marathon, they would have done everything they could have to try to stop me. And they would have been very upset. So I didn't tell my parents that I was training for the Boston Marathon. Very few people knew. My boyfriend John knew, and one of my close friends, Gail, knew, but hardly anyone else knew, because I knew people think I was nuts even more, and they try to stop me, and I wasn't going to stop. Yeah, it was just way outside the social norm for a grown woman to be running back there in 1964.
I mean, it's hard to believe now with thousands of women running marathons every weekend, it seems, and you were the first one to ever do it. I mean, it was just a different world, but it's hard to imagine now.
It's hard to believe how strong social prejudice and social custom can be. But a woman was expected to get married if she was lucky enough to go to college, right after she got married. There was very little way for a woman to support herself unless she did get married and if she wanted children, as I did, and so forth. So it was socially improper. I mean, it was thought to be impossible for a woman to run that kind of distance, and nobody ever questioned it. It's this one of the dangers of prejudice, and one of the dangers of taking kind of the social norms as normal. A lot of them aren't normal at all. And then I was going to run in 1965, and I fell and I sprained both ankles in the snow, and so I had to wait a whole nother year before I could run. And I kept up my training during that year. I was still going to school at Tufts and studying. I went to Woodstock, Vermont to run there's a 100-mile horseback event up there every September. I said, you know what, I'm going to go see if, how much of the 100-mile I can run, at least 26.2 miles of it, just because I will have a measured mile. I'll have a measured course, and I'd never had a measured course, and I didn't have a watch, so I didn't really know what my time was or anything. I was just trying to run as well as I could. So I took a bus up to Woodstock. The first day I set out running with the horses, and I ran with the horses for 40 miles. And so I knew I had I knew I could run 40 miles, and it was up and downhill, old logging roads, and it was quite a hilly, difficult course. So I thought, if I can do that, I could probably run the Boston Marathon.
When was the 100-mile horse race?
September of 1965.
Okay. So September 1965, that's quite a way to kick off training for the 1966 Boston Marathon. Where did you do your training for the 66 race?
I didn't know how to train. I mean, I didn't have any books, so I was just building up my strength, my system. And so the major way I trained was in 64, going across the country. And then in 65, I just tried to keep that level pretty much. And then the question was, how do I keep my training over the winter until April, from September to April? My friend Will, who had joined the Navy and I had first run with, came back for Christmas in 1965 and asked me to marry him. And so I said yes. I was so happy to see him again. And I went out to California and married Will. And so the last bit of my training was actually in California.
Okay. So you're in California, and you then have to get to Boston to finish what you started, which is to go run the 1966 Boston Marathon. When did you leave to get to Boston? The race was on Tuesday, April 19th, 1966. When did you leave California?
Well, just before that, I wrote for my application to Will Cloney, was then the race director, and Jock Semple was, he and Will Cloney were running the marathon at that point. So I wrote to the BAA, the Boston Athletic Association, and I used my real name, and I asked if they would send me an application form so I could run the Boston Marathon. I got a letter back from Will Cloney, and he said women are not physiologically able to run marathon distances. And he wasn't just being prejudiced. This was what everybody thought. I mean, this was if you ask the man on the street or a woman on the street, women didn't even know they could do this. They would say, of course a woman couldn't possibly run, the woman or the weaker sex. And furthermore, Will Cloney wrote, the longest race for women is 1.5 miles. There are no marathons for women. The marathon is a men's division race. Well, I didn't know anything about divisions or anything. To me, the marathon was just a bunch of guys who got to Hawkins and loved to run to Boston. I mean, I didn't know really, I was so naive. So when I saw this thing, I saw this letter, and I get this sinking, angry feeling, the same sinking, angry feeling that I'd had growing up, looking at the way women are forced to live in this little box. Because you belong to a certain group of people, you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to have a credit card in your name. It's very difficult to get into medical school. You can't be a lawyer. You can't be a senator. You can't. It's very difficult to do any of these things. And now I'm being told that I can't do the thing that I love, that I want to do, most of all, that I've trained for 2 years, because you belong to this class of people. This is the whole tragedy of prejudice. This is why we have to get over it. We have to get over this thing. We have to get over this group typology. I mean, everybody's an individual. What this country is all about. We're all individuals. We all have different loves and different abilities and gifts. So there was this horrible sinking feeling, this anger, like, damn it. And then I thought, you know what? Oh, I ran. And then I just ran, like I threw the letter down. I ran all the way up to Del Mar. Actually spent the night on the beach. And then I woke up and I said, you know what? You have to run that race. You have to run that race, because here's a chink in the armor. If you can get through this, like, if you can break this wide open, if you can prove that a woman can run 26.2 miles and run it well, which everyone believes is impossible, you're going to throw into question all the other prejudices and false beliefs that have been used to keep women down for centuries. I mean, this wasn't just a new thing. This is centuries old. There was books written in the 1800s on the subjugation of women. I mean, even Pride and Prejudice. I mean, all this thing. I mean, here it is again, right in your face. So I said, if I can prove this prejudice wrong, this misconception, it's going to throw into question all the other prejudices and misconceptions and false beliefs. I hate false beliefs. The false beliefs are the worst thing that we have. And so that's what I did. And then I realized, at that point, I realized it was going to be a social statement. And I took the bus back to Boston. It was a 3-day bus ride. And I arrived the day before the race. And I called my parents from St. James Square. And I told them I was in Boston. And I could hear my mother's sort of wavery voice, like, whoa, what are you doing in Boston? I'm going to run the Boston Marathon. Dead silence, like, what? Now we really know she's gone. We should have, locked her up years ago. She's gone over the edge. So anyway, they came and picked me up. My mother made this huge roast beef dinner and apple pie and all this stuff, which I wolfed down. And then my dad was really, he thought I was going to, injure myself or kill myself. He thought I was delusional. That poor girl, she thinks she's going to run the Boston Marathon, because they didn't realize I'd trained for 2 years. And so he went storming out of the house. He had a sailing regatta he had to get to at Tufts. But I convinced my mother, and my mother had spent her entire adult life trying to get me to conform to the same deadening social norms that had made her life so miserable. And I said, Mom, I got to do this to help to set women free. And that really got to her. I mean, I could see her lips starting to quiver and a tear come to her eye. It's like, and for the first time that in years, the first time I can remember, we hugged each other. We hugged each other. She drove me to the start, well, not all the way to the start, but the outskirts of Hopkinton, let me out. And I started running around Hopkinton. How am I going to get into this? I was dressed in my brother's Bermuda shorts, new boys' running shoes, which was a huge mistake. I didn't know they had to be broken in. I didn't know what I was getting into. I knew I was doing something wrong, but I thought I would be arrested. And I thought, something, I didn't know what would happen. So I was running around trying to find a way to, how am I going to get in? I could see the men in the pen. I found a little clump of bushes as near to the start as I could. And then I ran. I thought you had to warm up. So I went out to some buildings and an alleyway, and I was running up and down the alleyway for about 40 minutes, because after a 3-day bus ride, how you get a little bit stiff. And so I was warming up. And then as the beginning of the race, it was approaching noon. And so I came back to my little hiding place in the bushes, and then the starting gun went off.
So
and I weighed,
let's just pause there for a second.
yeah,
You're wearing boys running shoes on your feet?
boys size 6 running shoes.
Did they fit?
No, I bought them in San Diego. I had trained in nurses' shoes because nurses' shoes, I had worked one summer as a nurse's aide when I got out of high school, and I had nurses' shoes, and they were great because they were made of leather and they were sturdy shoes. Most of the shoes for women in those, they were very flimsy with pointed toes, and you couldn't, sneakers were okay, but they're not really not, but the nurses' shoes were great for running. They had great bottoms. They didn't skid on things. So, but just before the race in San Diego, my friend Bill Gukin out here was a member of the track and field club in San Diego, and I met him running around Balboa Park. And he said, "Well, why don't you get some boys running shoes?" And I never thought of boys running shoes. He said, "They're lighter. These things you're wearing, they're so heavy." And so I said, okay. So just before I got on the bus, I got this new pair of boys size 6. They didn't fit, and I hadn't broken them in, and so that's what I was wearing, and a blue hooded sweatshirt.
So you have a blue hooded sweatshirt on, and you have your brother's Bermuda shorts on, and these shoes that don't fit, and you just were on a bus for 3 days across the United States, and you had
Right.
roast beef and apple pie for dinner the night before,
Right.
and you're running laps around Hopkinton just to get loose, right?
Yeah, I probably ran 3 miles or so before the race started. But and yeah, see, I didn't know. I didn't have a coach. I didn't have any books. I didn't know. I thought protein made you strong. I was starving because all I'd had to eat was bus station chili and apples for 3 days. I get off the bus. I was really hungry.
What did your mother say to you as you got out of the car? Like, did she wish you luck? Was
Yes,
there a
yes,
plan?
yes, yes. Yeah, she wears me out. And I have to tell you about this one woman on the bus. Speaking of this, I was sitting on the bus behind the driver, sort of in the front, and this very large African American woman gets and sits down next to me, and I'm taking like a third of the seat. And she was so nice. She was just the most wonderful woman. And so we got talking. It turned out she was from Los Angeles, and we were talking about the Watts riots. See, Johnson, the whole Civil Rights Voting Act had just been passed, and in '65, and so we were talking about the civil rights movement and everything, and she was just so nice. And so I told her that we were talking about women and civil rights, and we were saying, there ought to be civil rights for women too, because you know we've had a hard time over the centuries. And so I was telling her that I was going to go to Boston, run the Boston Marathon, and they didn't allow women to run. But I was going to show them. I was going to prove that a woman could actually run a marathon and run it well, and that I hoped that this would kind of change people's prejudices against women or about women, it's false beliefs. And she was really supportive. Yeah, you show them, girlie. You show them. You go there and you show them. And then, this is so sweet, at night, of course, you sleep in your seat. So I'm leaning against the window, sleeping. And I feel this something coming on, being put on top of me in the night. And it was warm. It was cold on the bus, and coming through the mountains and everything. And I wake up, and she had taken her coat. Oh, this is so beautiful. She had taken her coat in the middle of the night and put it over me to keep me warm. And she got off at St. Louis, or St. Louis, I guess, depending on whether you're French or English or however you pronounce it. And anyway, she said, "Well, you go get them, girlie. Good luck," she says. So that was another woman who was wishing me good luck on this thing. And then my mom, when we hugged there in Hopkinton, and she said, well, just, you know, be careful now, good luck, and hope you're going to be okay, sort of thing. A worried mom.
You must have been carrying her wishes and your mother's well wishes as you were in Hopkinton looking for some forsythia bushes to hide into. So what you felt like you had to hide before the race began? Is that right?
Well, I knew if they saw me, they would try to throw me out, or they might arrest me. I knew I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing. And so, yes, and my greatest concern was that they would stop me from running, and that I would not be able to demonstrate what I'd come there to demonstrate. So now I had a big responsibility. It wasn't just me running for my own challenge and pleasure. It was I come to break open this prejudice, these false belief about women. And if they stopped me, I couldn't make this statement. I couldn't make this demonstration. So it was vitally important to me to get into that race and to run that distance, and to have people know that I'd run that distance.
What happened after the gunfire?
So I waited until about half the pack went by, and then I jumped in. And at first, I was just running along with the other runners, and they were all around me. And very quickly, I could hear voices behind me, and the men were saying, "Is that a girl?" That they were studying my anatomy from the rear. And I always laugh at this point, because I think they were very quick to pick up that I was a woman studying this rear view. And so I knew I had to keep things upbeat. I wanted to keep the whole thing upbeat and light and non-threatening. I wanted to show that men and women can do all of life together. And this stupid war between the sexes have been going on, these stupid gender discriminations and so forth. I wanted to show that we could all do this together, and we could do it in this happy, loving, upbeat way. So I smiled and turned around. It is a woman. It is a woman. So then, to my great relief, they were all supportive, and they said, "Gee, I wish my wife would run. I wish I could share my love of running with the woman that I love." And I'm running along, and they were so happy. And then a little while later, I said, it was a hot day, and I said, "I'm getting hot. I want to take this off, but I'm afraid if they see I'm a woman, they'll throw me out." Well, at that point, they became protective. They were like my brothers, and we won't let them throw you out. It's a free road. You can run. You can run. You can run. So I took off the sweatshirt, and then everybody could see I was a woman. Again, I was wearing a tank top black bathing suit underneath the Bermuda shorts and the sweatshirt. So I throw it, and then all of a sudden, like, there's a stunned silence as people realize I'm a woman, and then people start screaming. And when you do something very far outside the social norm, people can be hostile. And so I didn't know how this was going to come out, but they weren't hostile. They were supportive. And all of a sudden, the women were screaming and clapping, and the men were going, "Atta go, girly!" And I mean, it was just fantastic. The support I got from the spectators was so much a part of this race, and I felt, oh, gee, I ought to wave and say hi to these nice people along the way, And so it was all a very positive thing.
At what mile about did you lose the sweatshirt? Was it very early, or was it about midway?
It was probably in Ashland somewhere. These guys were fast. They really picked this up fast. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah. And by this time, now the news reporters who could see this. And Jerry Nason, who was a reporter, he lived in Winchester, the same town that I grew up in. And he realized this was history in the making. So he started to phone on ahead. And it started being broadcast on the radio. There was a local radio channel that was broadcasting my progress towards Boston. So as I approached Wellesley, the women, and I know this because Diana Chapman Walsh, who was then a student at Wellesley and then became the president of Wellesley. I met her in 1996, and she wrote a really nice article about this, and we talked about this, and she said, we knew you were coming, she said. We could hear it on the radio, and so we were looking for you. So as I approached, I could hear the screech tunnel. I could, the women, and in those days, they were right in the road, and they put their arms up, you know, making a tunnel, and you actually had to crouch through and go through the tunnel. They don't do that anymore, but, and so as I was coming up to Wellesley, I could hear this yelling, and I didn't know what it was, but the guys around me told me, yeah, this is the best part of the race. So we get up there, and suddenly this huge yell. I mean, women were screaming, they were jumping up and down. I remember seeing their, in the sunlight, their hair blowing in the wind and them screaming. And, you know, and it was at that point that I realized that this was really going to change the way people think about women. And it's going to change the way women think about themselves. It was like, that was like, it was a pivotal moment there. And I could feel tears come to my eyes with this. And here's this woman with all these kids, you know, and she knows the world's never going to be the same. And so I run on, and I'm feeling great. I mean, mile 17, I'm feeling great. And of course, Heartbreak Hill is up in the distance. And of course, I've been running up and down the Rocky Mountains. So Heartbreak Hill wasn't so much that it was steep or hard. I'd gone up mountains and a lot more than that. I'd run across the Continental Divide, but it's the way it's placed in the race. As you come into the end of the race, and then it goes up in several layers. So you go up, and actually it was a relief to be going up because most of the race is down. But the problem was I was beginning, my feet, the blisters were starting to really wear on me. And I didn't know you're supposed to drink water on the race. I had learned in high school that if you drink water while you're exercising, you get cramps. So I had drunk no water. It was a hot day. I still had that roast beef sitting in my stomach. My blisters were starting to go through. So going up those hills, so I go up one and then up the next. And so it was coming down the other side that I felt it in the fronts of my legs. And by then my blisters were really bad. And I could feel my pace dropping off. And most of the race, I was running, and I didn't have a watch, but the guys around me were on a sub 3 hour marathon for most of the race. And I was feeling good. I was in really good shape. But the last few miles of the race, my feet were killing me. And I was severely dehydrated. And so I was just tiptoeing along. It wasn't that I lost strength. It was that my feet hurt so bad that it just every time I put them down, it was a searing jolt of pain. And you know, I didn't take any aspirin or anything. I didn't know that people did this, Tylenol, you know, anti-inflammatory. I didn't. So it hurt, and so I was tiptoeing along. My pace dropped way down, and I was feeling so disappointed. Like, oh, this is probably the worst you know, I've ever run. And I thought, gee, I hope there's somebody still at the finish line when I get there. No, and I was really feeling, you know, a letdown for those last three or four miles. Then I come and turn down Hereford Street and make that turn onto Boylston. In those days, it stopped at the Prudential Center. I turned down there, and the people hanging out of the windows, and they're all cheering and drinking beer. And I turn the corner, and there's thousands of people there. They're still there, and the press truck is rolling along, and I pick up my speed a little bit on that final thing, and I cross the finish line, and reporters come all around me, and some kind soul threw a blanket. They had, in those days, they had sort of those wool blankets they threw around. They didn't have aluminum. And then the governor of Massachusetts, John Volpe, who lived in Winchester, again, the same town that I grew up in. The governor of Massachusetts came down and shook my hand. And then I was rushed off to, one thing. the guys around me wanted me to come and have the post-marathon stew with them. They always had. And I got to the door and they said, sorry, no women allowed. Women are not allowed in here. So the man apologized. The runners, they thought, oh, we're so sorry. We feel so bad. But anyway, but the reporters took me off to a hotel room nearby and they started asking me questions like, what, no, where are you from? Why are you running this and all this? And so that was the 66 marathon. And then the next day it was front page headline. First gal run, Hub Bride, Hub meaning Boston, of course. Hub Bride, first gal to run marathon. And it was huge. It was huge. And it went out on wire all the way around the world. My parents had some friends in Malaysia that had heard about this. And the Japanese won that year, I think.
Yeah.
So it was
on the men's.
Yeah. They were really good. They really cleaned out.
Yeah.
And so it was, it went out by wire all over the world. And I just had the feeling that this was some kind of pivotal moment in changing the way the people think about women. And so then I went home. I took a taxi home, and I got there, and the cars parked all up and down the street. And I thought to myself, gee, somebody must be having a party. And I come to my house, and they're all at my house. There's reporters, dozens and dozens of reporters inside and all around in the yard. And I had never met a reporter before, and I was fascinated. I thought, wow, this is great. Imagine being a reporter. This is so cool. And my parents are standing in this house, totally bewildered, totally confused. The phone is ringing off. It's congratulations on your daughter. You must be very proud and all this. And so here's my dad, who thought I was delusional. He has his arm around me. We knew she could do it, kind of thing. They took a photograph of my parents and me sitting there, and my parents beaming proudly. I love my parents. I miss them so much. Mm.
You certainly must have surprised them. They must have been so impressed with all of the things you had done to date, but they certainly were not prepared. I mean, they had no idea that you were training to do something of this distance. They must have been
no idea.
They were bewildered by the idea in the first place, and then for the next day,
right.
I mean, you've just arrived across the country, but not only that, you've just done something that no one has ever done before, and now you're back home and their house is filled with reporters. They must have been like bewildered.
I think I hope that at that point they tried to stop getting me. I hope they stopped trying to get me to conform to society's norms, because they had a daughter that was not at all conforming to society's norms. And they thought, for my own good, for your own good, you've got to stop running in the woods with the dogs. You've got to find a husband, please, it's for your own good. You don't understand. This is society. This is the way the world works. I can't live in a world like this. I can't. I've got to get out and go live in a remote cabin in Canada somewhere with my dogs, or I've got to change the world. It can't go on like this. It's not right. It's not fair. And there's still a lot of things that are not right and not fair, and a lot of false beliefs out there that need to be overturned.
For sure. Bobbi, the next year you decided to come back and run it again in 1967. This time, were your parents expecting you
yes.
to? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, this is totally different. They paid for my airplane flight. They interviewed. Of course, everyone knew I was coming, and the reporters were already calling my parents. Well, is she coming this year? Well, yes, she's coming, but she's sick. I had the flu. She's sick. We're not sure if she's going to run or not, but yes, she'll be there. And so I flew in. I was really sick with the flu, and I was very tempted not to run because I did not feel good. But I said, you know what? I have to run, because even after I had run in 66, there were still people out there who just couldn't believe that a woman could run a marathon. Women bake cookies. I mean, see, this is the danger of stereotypes. You have a stereotype, you wear an apron, you're in the kitchen, you're cooking cookies, you know, you don't run marathons. It was way outside. People think in stereotypes. And so this was jolting their stereotypes. It was jolting their preconceptions about the world and their place in the world too.
Mm-hmm.
And so and this is what has to happen. This is how we're going to break down these stereotypes of group typology that we have to do. We have to see that people are individuals. So, but this was something they still couldn't fathom. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, I'll do it again. So I get to the start. The reporters were interviewing me. I was right up there at the start of the race, right at the starting line, and right in plain view, talking. Everybody was supportive. It was all very exciting. I was going to run again. And once again, the starting gun goes off. Once again, I wait till half the pack goes. I kind of seating myself back. I didn't want to interfere with the front runners. And then I start running, and I run and run. And at some point in the race, I couldn't breathe. And I stopped, and I actually fell onto somebody's lawn. I remember lying there with that cold April spring lawn. And that year was cold. It was kind of drizzly, a little bit mixed of freezing stuff around the edges. And I lay there, and they were going to call my father, and they were going to call the hospital and so forth. I lay there, I don't know how long, at least 15 or 20 minutes probably. And I didn't think I was going to finish the race. And then all of a sudden, whatever it was in my chest, it was like a cramp or something, it released. I could breathe again. And so, much to everybody's amazement, I leapt up and ran the rest of the way to Boston. And then I got home. My parents were watching me. My parents drove me to the start, by the way, and they also were watching at Wellesley, and I think they picked me up in Boston afterwards. And then I got home that evening, and I found that I was not the only woman in the race that year. That there was a woman who had gotten an illegal number, and so enraged Jacques Semple that he was trying to actually grab the number off her, and it created quite a negative atmosphere that year that had not been there the first year.
Did you receive any attention from the race officials at all in '67? I know you didn't have a number, so did they simply not pay much attention to you?
They didn't try to remove me or anything. But there was a general negative feeling because I guess the word had spread that there was you see, the problem is that it was a men's division race. And I wasn't trying to compromise the race in any way. I was just trying to demonstrate that a woman could run this kind of distance and be part of this thing that I was in love with. And the problem is that according to the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union rules, if there's an unqualified runner in a race, that race could lose its accreditation. And here, Jacques Semple's whole life was the marathon. He loved this marathon. And so here was an unqualified runner. Obviously, a woman isn't qualified to run in a men's division race any more than a man is qualified to run in a women's division race. So this jeopardized the accreditation of the race itself. And so he was outraged, and as I say, he tried to grab the number. But I wasn't trying to jeopardize the race. I was just trying to run what they now call the Pioneer Division Women's Marathon. And so technically, the first year, I was the first and only woman in the Pioneer Division, Women's Division race. The second year, I was one of two. I finished about an hour ahead of the other runner. And then I came back the third year. And again, this was the yet to be sanctioned Pioneer Women's Division Boston Marathon. I wasn't in the men's division race. I was running along with them.
Mhm. You ran 3 times. You won. You ran 321,
Right.
327, and then 330 year after year after year. That's pretty consistent. Even in that year when you had the flu, when you weren't feeling well, I mean, you would have run a lot faster, I guess, if you hadn't stopped for 20 minutes. But you
Yeah.
were able to still pick up and finish with an incredible time that year. You
It,
must have been feeling like you were in very good shape.
I was in good shape, but I was kind of coasting. In the third year, I was enrolled in a very, very demanding pre-medical curriculum out here at the University of California, and taking organic chemistry, all kinds of demanding. My minor was math. I was taking linear algebra and a very demanding course, and I wasn't training the way I had before. I was coasting, and I go down on the beach and I'd run up and down, but nowhere near. I wasn't really training the way I was, just coasting. So the third year I came, I was basically coasting on the conditioning that I had for the previous. I kept a kind of a level.
Yeah. You had built such a good base of fitness, you
Yeah.
just were able to keep it going. Okay, we're almost out of time, Bobbi, but the last story, you have to tell us about how you ran on the beach and it was you would always run on the beach in Southern California. But one time it
Yeah.
was low tide and you ran. eh, Take it away.
Oh, okay. Yes, I was living, again, my husband and we had a little apartment on Hawthorne Street in San Diego. And he had gone off to, almost after we were married, he had gone off on a ship to somewhere in the Pacific around Vietnam. And so I was there alone and I was training. So I thought, well, I love to run. So I took the ferry. In those days, there was a ferry across to Coronado Island. And then I ran down the Silver Strand, and I was running, it was low tide. And oh, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Sunlight sparkling on the water was so beautiful. It was transcendently beautiful. I was running down, and I went and I waded across an estuary, and I kept running and running further south. And suddenly I began to think, this feels, something feels different about this, that I'm not sure what. And it was getting late, so I thought, well, I'll turn around and go back. Well, then the tide had come up. I was a little further up the beach. And when on my way down, I had noticed some barbed wire and stuff. I didn't pay much attention to it up the high tide. Came back, and the United States Border Patrol stopped me and said, "You are now about to enter the United States." And I said, "I thought I was in the United States." "No, you're in Mexico. And what are you doing here?" And they couldn't believe that this is sort of ragamuffin kind of running on the beach. So I said, "Well, I was just running. I just went on." "Well, where are you from?" "Well, San Diego." "You ran all the way from San Diego?" "Yeah." Well, they just didn't know what to do with me. So they brought me into their office and they said, "Well, can you have any ID?" "No, I don't have any ID. I don't have." And so, "Well, is there anyone we can call?" And so, well, I happen to be friends with Ewing Mitchell. Well, Ewing Mitchell there was a very popular television show called Sky King. Ewing Mitchell was one of the lead actors on that program. And I'd been staying with him. He was a friend of my uncle's. And so I'd been staying with him up in Rancho Santa Fe. And so I said, "Well, what's his number?" So I gave him Ewing's number, or they called Ewing's number. And luckily, Ewing was there. And Ewing came to the phone and he said, "Yeah, we have this young woman down here." And he said, "Yeah, no, she's fine. She's a long distance runner. Yeah, she's married to a Navy man. She's staying with us." And so then the guys came back and they were very apologetic and, "Oh, and I was, "Well, how would you know? You're just doing your job." So they drove me to San Diego. They drove me across the border and said, "Well, good luck and take care." And they were really, really nice. And so then I just I ran home from there. But I wasn't used to being close to international borders.
Well, as we endeavor to make this world a more healthy place, this world a more vibrant place, we look to events like running, we look to running races, we look to sports like running, and we look to the leaders within those sports and certainly the pioneers within those sports, Bobbi. And that's you. And we are so thrilled to have you in our sport. We're thrilled to have you in our world. And we're thrilled to have you here with us today speak with us and to speak with the runners and share your perspectives and visions. So Bobbi, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I mean, thank you, and thank the BAA for putting on this event. And I always say that the Boston Marathon, I'm still in love with it. People from all over the world, all political denominations, all religions, we all get along. We all love each other. We all hug each other. If we can do it in Boston and the marathon, we can do it in the world.